Are you feeling terrible? Is that friend that you just can't stand called depression knocking on your door once again? Well,
That's
we're in
like
luck.
it's like one of those old what do they call them? The public access like messages.
Yeah. The
She's like,
more you
no, see a
know.
dark cloud, like
Not to make light of it because
no,
depression sucks
it does
big
suck.
time. And
Yeah.
that's why we have this special episode on depression because
Woo.
hey, the winter blues are among us. This is the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. What's going on, Danny?
What's up, Randy? There's also like, I mean, like a million other reasons that people could be depressed too.
Oh yeah, life. Hello.
In general, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
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 harder now than I mean, I'm
we
sure people have said this throughout history,
oh they always have,
but
yeah.
I'm pretty sure that emotionally and
But in our
existentially, life
case,
has never been harder. Yeah. I
no,
don't want to blame it on the 1980s, but
but yeah. No, I think you're actually right though. I mean, I do because I think like, well, one, we face more information than we ever had to process. We're aware of what's going on in the world way more on a daily basis than we've ever been. And like, there's, the news, social media, all that stuff feeds on emotion because that's what keeps you watching. So the more negative, the more depressing, the more dark things are, the more people are going to tune in. And so you get this overemphasis on all the bad things constantly, right? And like instead of like really, because the good things they don't sell. So it's like,
hmm
part of the problem.
yeah, and depression can be frightening too. Because I mean, the game of depression is suicide.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Oftentimes
insane.
like depression comes about this feeling of hopelessness, things aren't going to get any better. And
Being
it's crazy
stuck.
because
Yeah.
it's the world's oldest con. It's your mind playing a trick on you because during those times when you're down, things look differently from your mind. They did studies with depressed individuals and bipolar individuals and undepressed individuals, and people just couldn't make sense of like normal rhymes, like a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. People who had like bipolar and were depressed couldn't
Yeah.
understand this type of stuff, whereas somebody else would be like, "Oh yeah, I get what that means."
Yeah.
It's
Well,
just
it's
your
because
mind
you're
doesn't function normally at those
no,
times.
and I feel like I know, especially like myself, like I feel like you feel like it's hard to concentrate, you'll get scattered brained, right? Like I know like I'll have a really like it almost feels like my brain's slow, like or
Mhm.
slowed down. Yeah, it's really weird and it's frustrating, which then makes it worse, which then and I think that's the difficult thing with it too. And I know this, I'm sure this happens to you too, because I know we talked about it a lot, but like it's like this like snowball effect of like the negativity, the hopelessness feeds more negativity, negative interpretations and hopeless interpretations, which feed the negativity and hopelessness. And it's just
hmm
like this intense cycle, right?
Yeah, and here's the other thing is that you need to talk to somebody about it. So like I was saying with depression, like as it gets worse, it leads to suicidal, homicidal, different types of thoughts. And other people can't read your mind, unfortunately.
No, it'd be nice.
Even
Well,
even even re no, even really good therapists are terrible at predicting when
oh
their
yeah.
patients are suicidal or anything like that. So like if you do have thoughts like that, talk to somebody. There's no harm in it. Like one time when I was feeling suicidal, I talked to Danny and he helped me out of it, just
Yeah.
helping me recognize that like people have these thoughts and it's
Yeah.
okay. And
Happens to
I
all of
it
us.
was
It
such
really
a
does.
relief.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it does happen to all of us. And I think that's what you forget too, because it's easy to like, and I think whenever we have problems, especially whether it's depression or whether it's just like a difficult obstacle in life, because it's our own, it always feels unique, individual, and like no one else would ever have it before. But the reality is you talk to other people and you realize, oh, it's part of the human experience. Everybody's been through this. Maybe not the exact same thing, maybe not for the exact same reasons, but the, general outlines very similar, they'll understand. And I think your point too that other people can't read your mind is a really good one. Because I think we tend to like, I know like just in general, most people tend to kind of err on the side of like people are doing okay. So even if they see somebody's like not doing well, they're like, well, I don't want to bother them. Like I don't want to make it worse, right? Or I don't want to point it out just in case like, for whatever reason, like we actually talk ourselves out of it. So a lot of times that's hard because it means the person that is depressed needs to make the effort to talk to someone. I mean, hopefully if somebody around you that actually will notice it and say something, but like, don't be shy to talk because I think it's not people being mean. They're just like doing what we normally do, right? Which is trying to kind of not bother each other, if we're having a bad
Mhm.
day or something.
Yeah. So I've been really fortunate recently. I stumbled upon this author who is a medical doctor, but also a psychologist. And he wrote some amazing books dealing with anxiety and depression.
You don't say.
The
Which books?
yeah, the most recent one is called Feeling Great, but another one that I really like is called When Panic Attacks. He has a whole bunch of books. He even has a free podcast called the Feeling Good Podcast. It's very good. And it's crazy because what he talks about a lot is how it's these cognitive distortions. So basically, these faulty ways of
Yeah.
thinking that lead to a lot of problems with anxiety and depression. And particularly with depression, one of the big ones is all or nothing thinking and perfectionism.
Oh
So,
yeah.
like the idea that because I have this one flaw, that means that I'm a flawed human being. It's never going to get any better. And I feel bad, which is emotional reasoning. So it's over.
I remember when I was really depressed too, like at points. You tend to, I know at least, well, you tend to focus on one thing a lot of times. It doesn't have to be the same thing every day, but there'll be like one thing that seems like insurmountable. I remember my student loans used to always give me that feeling, right? Where like it'd be like just like thing that's like, how am I ever going to get rid of that? Like, is it even make sense to keep going? Like it's so, you know what I mean? Like, and the logic does make
Yeah.
sense at the time. In your head it makes sense. There's a lot of emotions involved. It's easy to convince ourselves, right, and to see the world that way. And I think it's interesting because we do tend to do that. We'll focus on like one big thing that's like this seemingly impossible obstacle ahead of us. And it's funny because I noticed like once you start dealing with these things, that you realize how easy it is to start dealing with them. And it's like it's
Hmm.
just like it's weird, you're like dragging your feet almost to make the effort.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's crazy because you know how we always used to talk about this, how like we would ask each other like or it was something along the lines of like when you're feeling bad you think your life is terrible, but
Yeah.
when you're
Yeah.
feeling good you think your life is great. And it's crazy how the mind plays tricks on you because when you're in a bad spot the thoughts are like, oh, it's terrible, it's never going to get any better. And then when you're in a good spot you don't even think about it, you're just like, life is awesome, I'm never going to have any worries ever again, I've finally solved everything. Yeah.
Finally free. Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be like this well, that's the funny thing. We make really big mistakes that things are static, that they'll stay the same forever, which is a terrible mistake that we make because that's, when the good feelings are there, we think they'll last forever. When the bad feelings are there, we think they'll last forever. Like nothing's going to change, even though change a constant, right? And I think it's funny too because we also like, it's so easy to forget that the world we see is an interpretation heavily influenced by our emotional state, our physical state, and it's not just about our beliefs and ideas. And I think when you start to remember, or when you consciously remember that, it can help you be more aware too. Like I noticed the more I started, because I started to try to like be more aware of my like emotions and identify them. And it's been an ongoing process, but I noticed the more I do that, the more I am able to catch times where I'm like, oh, everything's messed up. And I'm like, wait. No, I'm just tired, or like I'm just feeling a little down today, or
Mhm.
whatever. That's really the reason, not that everything is actually bad.
Yeah. And also like depression, it may be a disease. Like it may
Oh,
be.
I'm
There
sure
may be
there's
some
there's
biological
probably,
part
yeah.
to it. You know,
I mean,
but it can also be a symptom, like a sign that something else is going on. A lot of people have postulated that depression is like an unconscious psychological conflict. And I know that when I was the most depressed in my life, it was because there was an unconscious psychological conflict. I was supposed to get married to this girl that I really didn't want to get married to. And the closer it got to the wedding, the more and more depressed I got until I spoke with my brother and he said, you can marry her, you cannot marry her. Either way, I'll love you. And I was
yeah.
just like, holy cow. You mean I don't have to do this? And he's like, no. And
Well,
so it
that's the
ended
other.
that, and the depression lifted immediately.
Well, that's one of the worst things I think that does, and it really does feel like a weight lifted off your shoulders, doesn't it? It's like crazy how much pressure it feels like you're under, like underwater almost. But
Hmm.
it's interesting too, because in those situations, right, we let these perceived obligations and expectations from the outside confine us to a position where we have no choice. And I know like that's for a lot of people, I think that's when they feel the most hopeless. It's like you feel like you can't act because this obligation says you should do X, or these people expect you to do X, Y, Z, or be this thing or whatever. And you feel
Right.
pigeonholed. And I think that's where we find that hopelessness most. Because it's like, it's kind of like that feeling of like, you're doing the wrong thing, but you don't know how to do the right thing or how to make room for yourself to do it.
Yeah, and you're in pain, whether it be physical or psychological or emotional, and it doesn't look like there's a way out. And the only better option seems like, okay, suicide. But
Yeah.
in 99% of the cases, that may not be the right answer.
I mean, generally, I think it's probably not because it is like the problem with that is it is a final answer, right? Like you don't get any more
Hmm.
chances or answers after
The only way you can
that.
guarantee that things won't change,
Yeah,
that when they
right.
won't get better, is by suicide. Yeah,
It's crazy,
absolutely.
and I think it's oh, I just lost my train of thought. Do you have something
Yeah,
else?
but well, yeah, because I mean, I think there are also like philosophers who have talked about suicide and how it is the last right that you have. In some countries, they allow like assisted suicide and things like that.
Oh,
But
Netherlands is
it's
great
not
for that.
something where you can do immediately. Like, what do you think would, because you used to teach some of this stuff, what do you think would happen if there was a depressed person who wanted to commit
Well,
suicide? Do you
it's
think the state
funny.
would just be like, okay, well, let's just process this stuff and you can go ahead and do it? Or do you think there would be kind of a time gap and maybe some
There's always a time
treatment in
gap, and
between? Yeah.
there's always a time gap, and there's always a requirement that like you have to see multiple people. And the Netherlands is actually a great use case for this because they've had it for a long time, like active euthanasia, and they actually have like some of the best end of life care because that's an option. So I think it actually they've I think studies have found from what I remember that having that choice of like, because you know, like in America, like you get a disease or something, you don't feel good, and it's like you have to fight it or nothing. Those are your
Mhm.
options, right? Like you're a
Well,
failure, you
it's
give up,
almost
or
like
you keep
in
fighting.
America, it's really bad because it's like you either have to fight it or you're a coward and you can
Yeah,
die.
yeah, right. Or you're like
Yeah.
you're doing something bad to all these other people that are alive. Like it
Yeah.
makes no sense. It's insane. Over there, though, it gives the patient more autonomy, right? Because it's like, oh, I can pursue treatment, or this is an actual option where you'll assist me in this and it'll be peaceful. And
Hmm.
so, but there is, like, to your point, right? There is a process. Like, you have to show that there's a problem. They don't just do it for everybody. And, people were always scared of that, like, snowball effect. Like, if we just allow it, everybody's going to, blah, And it's
It's
like,
just slippery slope before you
yeah.
know it, there'll be nobody left.
And it's pretty clear that it's not that hard to put in, reasonable regulations. But
Yeah, and also not everybody wants to commit suicide. Some people enjoy
yeah.
their lives,
But there's
you know?
also good arguments too that like, especially like, I can clearly imagine cases that where somebody depressed or, and like that might be an option that's reasonable, but at least if it's on the table, it becomes a choice and that hopelessness feels less, it feels like you have options and that might even motivate you to then look at other options because when that
Hmm.
choice is there, it makes it easier to think about other things as well.
And it's something where you have to talk to other people. Like I think talking with other people
Yeah.
about it is one of the most important things to do. I know there's like a big fear about talking with other people because, oh no, what happens if they make me go to the hospital or something like that? And it's like that would probably be the best thing for you at that point if that
If
happens.
it's that
But
bad, yeah. I mean, sometimes
yeah,
that is the right thing. Yeah.
but like talking to other people is so important because when you're stuck talking with yourself in your head, you're number one, your mind's not in the right place anyway. So you're talking with a really bad person to talk with in your head. But also, like I was saying, people can't read your minds. And Danny and I both knew people who commit suicide when we were younger.
Oh,
I
yeah.
had two friends who did it when I was younger, and they didn't
I had a
tell
buddy
anybody before they
I had a
did it.
friend in grad
And
school who did it. Yeah. And
yeah,
nobody knew.
and everybody who uh met at their funeral was like, man, I wish he wouldn't have done that. Like, I love this guy. And
Yeah.
so
It
it's
sucks too because, you don't like, I know with my friend too that this happened later and like now when I was younger, but like, you don't know why either. And that's always the hard part, because it's like if they just said something and then you feel bad and it's like, a whole mess. But yeah, it is because,
mhm.
nobody wants the other person to go. And, it's tough
Yeah.
dealing with it.
This is actually, so this is a crazy thing. In one of these books by David Burns, he was talking about how he was having a conversation with someone who was suicidal. And one of the thoughts that they were having at that time was it would be better off for my friends and my family if I just commit suicide. And he's like, okay, let's take a look at that thought. Let's examine the evidence. Have you ever asked your friends or family if you're a burden on them, if they would feel better
Yeah.
if you were suicidal? No. And he's like, well, why don't you go just ask, see what they think? Because maybe you're right, it could be true. You may be a bigger burden, but there's a good chance that you wouldn't. And they went around and they asked their friends and family, and they were like, no, I'd be devastated. Like, I know this person whose brother or
Yeah.
sister did it, and they've never been the same since. And if you did that to me, like, sure, you're a pain, but I still would prefer to have you alive.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's funny too, I think too, because like if you talking about things too, putting them out in the world changes them too. Because it takes it out of your head and it helps with like not letting your imagination run wild with the ideas. Even if you're afraid to talk to somebody, just writing these things down can be helpful too. It's like a good starting point, I think, to get to talking. Like sometimes, like you want to talk to people, but you're not clear. Like sit down and just write down like what is bothering me. Trying to trace back that why, ask that why over and over again get some clarity, and then talk to somebody. But even just getting it on paper helps.
That's a really good one. You remember when we did the Artist's Way book and
Yeah, yeah,
and they
yeah.
made you like write for, I don't know, what was it, seven
Felt
pages
like
every day or
forever, but it
something
was
like
a
that?
yeah.
Yeah. But actually it's crazy because I've been doing that a lot recently where before I go to sleep, I'll take a blank sheet of paper and I'll just write a whole bunch of like I feel statements, like I feel this way, I feel this way, and just like rant for both sides of it and then rip it out.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because it just gets all that stuff out of my head, off my chest, and then I can just go to sleep a whole bunch lighter. It's a
But you know
great
what's funny?
practice.
You know how like in meditation and they always say like, you want to like you don't want to cling to your thoughts. You want to recognize them but let them go, right? And like detach from them. And they had this it was in Buddhism, I think they some I forget who, but they refer to it as like untying psychic knots. Like you're untying
Mm,
all the knots in your brain, which I always like that phrasing. And
hmm
it's funny when you write things down like that and stuff, there is like a letting go. It's like if you keep it in your head, you never voice it, you never write it down, it just keeps getting spun around and made bigger and bigger and bigger. If you get it out, it's like it allows you to let go of it a bit. And I think it also can help too, because I notice like when I do that myself, then I start writing stuff down, a lot of times it also helps me start planning how to deal with it too. Because it makes it like more real, like, oh, this is the problem right here. It's not my imagination keeps adding things on or adding, context and things and situations. It's like now I can probably address it. So it is a very helpful method. I think it does let you kind of detach from it a bit.
hmm Yeah. And let's see. Anything else for depression? It so like it's happened to me. It's happened to Danny.
Yeah,
It's happened to a lot of other people
everybody.
too.
I'm pretty sure like
Yeah.
probably everybody at
So
some point.
even though you are special, you're not unique in that depression has only hit you. But
Yeah.
when you are depressed, it can feel like it's unique to you and there's something specifically wrong with you and it's never going to get any better. But that's just a feeling, and that doesn't mean it's true.
Exactly. And the other thing too is I think if you are like pay attention, and this is also difficult, but if you are like be conscientious of what you're doing, what you're interacting with. Because I know like a lot of times when people are depressed, they'll actually like seek out things online that
Mm,
are going to make aggravate the depression. So like say you're broke, right? You start looking at houses that are $10 million or $500 million. You know what I mean? Like that kind of activity, or looking at like Facebook of people's lives from vacation pictures and stuff. And you're like, well, I don't have that. So
hmm
just shutting that stuff off and taking a break from it is probably one of the best things you can do too, because you will seek out whatever is going to aggravate that depression and make it worse, because that's what's going to draw your attention the most.
That's a great point. Yeah. How am I contributing to my own suffering?
Well, exactly, right? And we do it because we also want to, that's the other like kind of like con part of it and trick, which is like our brain wants to justify and reinforce how we feel with reasons. And it's very easy to seek reasons out, right? It's like when you
Hmm
write like a really bad paper in college that's totally biased, where you just find what supports your argument, right? And don't look at anything else. It's basically what you're doing, right? And it's easy to do because, we want to justify that how we're feeling is valid and real. And so we're going to make it the case.
hmm Yeah. And so yeah, the only recommendation that I would have is there's books by David Burns
Yeah.
and just small steps in the right direction. Because it doesn't take much, but like when you're depressed, it can be the hardest thing to get out of bed. It can be the hardest thing to take
Dude,
a shower,
my
to
thing, that was
smile, to
my
do
thing was just
anything.
like when I finally committed, I was like, all right, can't do this anymore. I was like, I started making like plans where like the next day I was like, I'm just gonna shower. And that was the only goal I had for the day. So it was like awesome because one, it was easy to do. Well, I mean, not easy, you know what I mean? Like you can
Hmm
have plenty of time to do it, but it's also a win. It's also, and it shows you that you can do these things and start making those changes. And then it's like a snowball effect. Things just get
Yeah,
better and
and
better.
like I've always been a fan of the calendar method where you just have a calendar and you just put an X on the day when you do the thing you're supposed to do. So like in the beginning, it's going to be hard to do anything. So pick
Yeah.
one positive habit, be it like drink a drink a whole bunch of water or go for a walk or
Right
say
for
hi
two
to an
minutes.
animal,
Yeah.
write for 2 minutes, whatever it is. Like pick one habit that could make a positive impact in your life and then just start putting X's on the calendar and connect them. And if you miss a day, so be it. Don't let it be 2 days in a row.
Yeah.
And that can really be helpful in getting you someplace where you'd
That
like
does
to
help a
take
lot. Yeah. And talk to people. I mean, I think that's the
you.
main thing too. Yeah. Get
Bingo.
it out there.
So there you have it on depression. Hopefully, if you're feeling depressed, you can feel better because, hey, it's the world's oldest con. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
our brains are smarter than we are sometimes, so we
Yeah,
gotta figure a
there's
way
also
out.
that there's also that 3-digit number now too, isn't there? What is it? I don't know what the actual number is now.
999
No, that's it's not.
911.
No, that's the emergency. It's like 388 or 988 or something for depression. I don't know. I don't want to confuse people, but
Yeah,
you can look it up.
they should have advertised it better. But yeah,
I
this
know.
the suicide prevention hotline, depression number,
Yeah.
whole bunch of stuff, tons of resources online. No joke about the Feeling Good podcast and the books by David Burns, Feeling Great When Panic Attacks. Those things have
Oh, they've been helpful for you
changed
as
my
hell.
life
Yeah, and they're good books. I've read some
incredibly.
of them already, and they're good.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're very
incredibly.
good.
Yeah. So actually they've been proven scientifically to work better than antidepressants
You don't
for
hear that often
depression.
from books, right?
Yeah, go figure. Yeah. So that's
That's
all for
awesome.
this episode of the Existential Stoic podcast. Join us next time. Until then, I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Andy.